So Manisha is going to cover the growing influence of environmental sustainability on consumer behaviour. So this follows some studies done by SQ Consult. So Manisha herself has been an economist for over 20 years, working across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. She's an expert in advising public and private decision makers on circular economy and other sustainability topics, and is currently an advisor to the Environmental, Social and Governance Council at the Centre of Financial Studies in Mumbai. So,
thank you for inviting me on behalf of SQ Consult to share some work on sustainability claims. Next slide, please. So in our work at SQ, we are increasingly coming across research that suggests that consumers are increasingly demanding products that minimize harm to and in fact have a positive effect on the environment. A 2020 study by Capgemini Research Institute across 6 EU countries, the UK, the US and India, found that almost 80% of consumers are changing shopping habits based on social responsibility or environmental impact. And 66% are choosing to purchase products based on environmental credentials. Research from the United States on actual purchasing of consumer packaged goods indicates that sustainability marketed products accounted for 56% of all growth between 2018 and 2022. And closer home, where I'm based, in the EU, we've seen that a study by the European Commission in 2020 found that 60% of EU consumers prefer to buy a product with an environment claim. Next slide, please. Not surprisingly, we see a proliferation of green claims. I'm sure wherever you go, whether it's a grocery store, we can go buy clothes, shoes, and any personal consumption items these days. And we never walk one aisle without coming across a range of these claims. At SQ Consult, we have looked into these claims under various parts of our work. In one specific study where we looked at 82 plastic items across a number of categories in 2020, we found ourselves lost in claims. What you see on your screens is the sheer range of green claims that we were able to identify. Next slide, please. And when we dived into these claims, we found that all is not as it seems. We developed a claims checklist that lays out a set of qualitative sustainability criteria against which we could assess the very many green claims that I just showed you that we found on these items. The criteria focused on reusability, refillability, recyclability, recycled content, biodegradability, compostability, bio-based content of plastic items, etc. We also looked at the checklist by the United Nations Environment Programme's guidelines for providing product sustainability information. And we use both our checklist and the UNEP checklist to assess the claims that we found to see if these claims are accurate, if they are clear, unambiguous, whether they consider the full lifestyle of a product, if they are substantiated sufficiently, etc., etc. What we also did was look at whether these claims were going beyond any legislative mandates, because we believe that turning legal compliance into green claims is, put simply, misleading for consumers. And what we found is that only 8 items out of these 82 met all the criteria on the checklist that we developed and the UNEP checklist. And we also found that these findings seem to resonate with a number of other assessments done across the EU. Specifically, in 2020, consumer protection authorities from 20 countries in the European Economic Area looked at 344 sustainability claims. And they found that in over half of the cases, the trader did not provide sufficient information to assess the claim's accuracy. They also found that in 50% of the claims, the consumer protection authorities had difficulty identifying whether these claims covered the whole product or only a part of the product, a specific component of the product. And in 36% of the claims, it wasn't clear whether the claim was being made for the company which was making the product or for the product itself. Next slide, please. There is a lot that I could tell you about those claims. I mean, fair to say that with all of these claims, analyzing them, diving deep into them, we also had a fair bit of fun. Here is a taste of the claims that we found. And I could spend a few weeks telling you about our findings, but for today, given the time we have, I will focus on 3 specific findings. First, the most frequent claim that we found across the products were around biodegradability and compostability. When we dived deeper into these claims, we found a lot of interesting things. We found that items were claiming to be biodegradable and compostable, although only parts of the items were actually biodegradable or compostable. In fact, there were some parts which were evidently, obviously not compostable or biodegradable, or the products were such that if they were put into use after the use that they were intended for, they could not be composted without being a health and safety hazard. Then we found that products were claiming to be biodegradable on the basis that they are biodegradable in landfill. First of all, there was no reason for some of these products to ever end up in the landfill. But the bigger problem is that this only incentivizes the take, make, and waste model. We are not looking at eliminating waste, and we're also not looking at eliminating landfilling and using land for that in the first place. We also found that biodegradable plastics were being presented as a solution to the plastic problem, but it completely ignored the fact that biodegradable plastics often behave in the same way as fossil fuel counterparts do when littered. And many items claiming biodegradability also ignored that biodegradability is a process that only occurs as fast as environmental conditions allow for it. Second, and this was extremely surprising, is that glass bottles that are perfectly recyclable and reusable were actually being replaced by biodegradable plastic bottles. And we found it absolutely ridiculous that this was like a license to litter plastic into the environment, because it was misleading consumers into thinking that the product would biodegrade by itself. Which obviously is not true. It was also counterproductive to our efforts, our global efforts to prevent plastic pollution in the first place, particularly when it comes to the oceans. The third thing we found is that there were a number of products claiming to be made from ocean plastic. But we couldn't figure out the environmental benefit in the bigger scheme of things for these products, because the environmental benefit depends on the type of waste that is being used and the type of recycling process that is being used. So, for example, chemical recycling processes are significantly more energy intensive than mechanical recycling. Next slide, please. One of the biggest issues we found in our study was the governance and verification of claims, particularly when it came to products like straws, plastic cups, plastic plates, cutlery, etc., etc. We found that claims were being made on these products specifically based on companies' own practices and policies, and they were not being supported by trusted labels, or the claims were not verified independently. We also found that many products which were claiming to have bio-based content were actually not getting the bio-based content certified for being sustainably sourced from trusted labels or trusted authority sources on this. One of the key challenges we had was that we found that companies were actually purchasing a lot of things from suppliers, you know, the B2B manufacturers. So for example, again, things like straws and cutlery and lids, etc. And we found ourselves struggling because we had no way, not even information on the company's websites, to be able to trace the claims and see whether they had been verified, what were the labels that were used, or who had actually done that kind of verification. Next slide, please. But there was also a problem when it came to the labels that we were looking at for verification and substantiation of the claims. We found that the very many labels and certifications that exist actually vary in the parameters that they use and their verification methods. And in fact, some of these certifications are actually not, don't encourage or don't go in for independent verification. Many labels actually lack guidelines on what environmental claims are suitable to specific products, or any guidance as, you know, specifically, for example, on reusability, recyclability, etc. So for example, if we are taking things like cutlery, etc., how many times does it go into the dishwasher before it begins to lose its shape, its quality, and its purpose, those kinds of things. And therefore, at what point of time does the recyclability claim actually stop? We also found that there are some labels which actually use inadequate standards and simply don't consider the life cycle analysis of products when they are doing these verifications. Next slide, please. Thank you. But over the last few years, the European Commission has increasingly taken note of some of these challenges. In March 2023, the Commission adopted a proposal for a directive on green claims. And the objective of this directive is to introduce common criteria to check claims and make claims reliable, comparable, and verifiable across the EU. It is putting in place through this directive new rules on governance of environmental labeling schemes to ensure that they are solid, they are reliable. And this directive will also mandate companies to prove their environmental claims on every single product. Watch this, how it pans. Also, the next time that we come across some of these claims on products and services that we are buying, please, let's examine them carefully and see where we are putting in the money. Are we supporting the right types of claims? Because companies which are genuinely innovating to ensure that products are green and services are green actually stand to lose out, because they just, you know, things are just lost in the context of the very many claims that are being made. I'll stop there. Thank you, Tom. Over to you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, Manisha. Yeah, very, very informative and interesting.